Hello, I'm Walt Bartman. I'm the founder director of the Yellow Barn Studio at Glen Echo, and we've been doing these instructor interviews, the instructors at the Yellow Barn Studio. And the instructor that we have today is Greg Kessler. I've known Greg for at least 30 years, and I'm really honored to have him joining us at our studio. He's going to be teaching some classes, and they're going to be on site. And hopefully you'll be able to take one of his classes. Well, good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning. Good to see you.
Yeah, so it's wonderful to see you, as a matter of fact. We just touched base here recently, and I think like I said, having you join us is in the studios, really going to be, as far as I'm concerned, you're going to be a great addition. And I think maybe now, so that people get to know you, can you tell us a little bit about what you've been up to in the last 30 years?
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, then I'm enthusiastic as well. I've been painting in New York. I graduated from Carnegie Mellon and Yale after studying under you in high school, and I came to New York. I've been there about 30 years painting and exhibiting, and it's been going well. It's certainly been a long journey, though, as you can imagine, just being an artist in New York and everything. But here I am in my studio in the Bronx, and good to see you.
Yeah, it's great to see you. So tell us a little bit about some of your background as far as when you went to Carnegie Mellon.
Well, Carnegie Mellon was more of I would say like a lot of technique, and I was very fortunate to have as a professor Sam Gilliam, as I'm sure you know, the Washington D.C. abstract artist, and he would basically became a mentor. It was a big influence, but Carnegie Mellon was rigorous. There was anatomy, and it was much more meat and potatoes kind of teaching. I really got a lot out of it. When Yale grad school, in my opinion, it was much more. There's more theory and things like that. So not as much the hands-on painting.
Uh-huh. So I've myself teaching as many years as I have, 50 years. I did teach at Carnegie Mellon, believe it or not, there
Oh, wow.
for a while. Yeah.
Nice.
And I would do that in the summers. And it's a
Well,
great,
many of your students went on to Carnegie Mellon, so
yeah. So
yeah.
it's a great school. And then of course Yale again, is an outstanding school. So anyone who's listening to this video is going to understand that Greg comes with a lot of experience, and honestly is truly a gifted artist and unique in so many different ways. So I think that now one of the things I want to ask you, as an artist teacher, what have you been up to in this period?
So I've done adjunct teaching. I've done printmaking at Columbia was for 2 semesters, as well as teaching at high school level and up adult level. So and different visiting artists at universities. So not so much full time, but I've always loved, getting enthusiastic with students and finding their vision and with art history and technique.
Yeah, and you come with a lot of background, so anyone who's going to be studying with you, of course, is going to benefit from your experience and your knowledge. You working in New York as an artist, can you explain a little bit about that? I know that's probably a unique experience.
Well, there's definitely like I guess you'd call it the lean or struggling years of like finding a job. You have to. Luckily, I found a job in a catering firm, so that was not so much physical hard labor, so that was nice. And then I moved to Williamsburg when I first moved to New York, and there was only 3 restaurants, so it was I was a real pioneer, and of course get kicked out of lofts and no heat and all that good stuff.
Yeah. So we're going to be taking a look at your work. Okay. So this is one of the things I want people to get to know you by, looking at what you're about. And I think, so what we're going to do now is we're going to share the screen. Okay. And, what I'd like to do is just have you really discuss some of the things that you've done
Sure.
here. So you provided me with like 10 images. So you should be seeing a shared screen now with the PowerPoint.
Yes.
Okay. So Greg, I've known, like I said earlier, I've known him for many years. And I think the thing that I'll say about his work, knowing him when he was in high school, was he was always really an inventive person as far as ideas are concerned, and he really expressing them through his art. And I think, we're going to talk about his work now. So you want to start with this one, Greg? You want to say anything?
Sure. So that's probably about 15 years ago or so. And I did a lot of paintings of these single or double figures. And, for me, even though it's a figure, it's for me a lot about the process of painting. In other words, Picasso once said he likes to, quote, destroy a painting. So, in other words, I might paint the figure and then scrape it out and turn it upside down, sort of unconventional approaches with the painting, like the abstract expressionist. And so sort of, in other words, the figure was a starting point, but it was also a lot about color and the tactile qualities of paint.
Mhm. I can see, when I look at your work, I can see the connection with Picasso, but I also see a kind of an interesting mix of Philip Guston and also Max Beckman. And I'm not sure if those two ring any bells for you, but
Oh, of course,
yeah.
Guston is like pretty much the painter's painter. And it was funny when I was in high school with you, I knew about the German expressionists, and of course I always was kind of an expressionist. But then I discovered Beckman and Carnegie Mellon, and he's definitely a huge influence as far as just amazing subject matter and classical technique.
Yeah, and to talk about your subject matter, can you say why
Well,
you've chosen to
to
do
be
it?
honest, I kind of I can't no other way to express it. Like I just paint whatever I'm into at the time. So in other words, I might paint bikers, or I might have the latest series is more about the catering world or slices of life. Or so in other words, I just find a subject and create a body of work, but it might change. I like the idea of painting more abstractly or unconventionally, as well as painting more naturalistically side by side. The kind of differences, like, again, back to Picasso, he'd paint like a classical type drawing in the day, and at night he might do something almost like a Basquiat spray paint,
Mhm.
thing.
Yeah, and is there anything else you want to say about this particular piece? Does it have any history or anything that you can tell us about?
Well, again, I was sort of into hand gestures and color a lot for me as an emotive content is a big thing.
Mhm. And what does this one reference? Any particular story or narrative that you can tell us?
Mm, it was more that I had these figures, and I would say where the legs are crossed, I would change that, and then sort of show like the history of the painting a bit.
Mhm.
And I used this sign enamel. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but in the black, that skinny black line is sign enamel. So again, it's like the figure is the starting point, it's something to hold on to, but it was more about experimenting with color and things like that.
And as far as size is concerned,
This one is pretty small, probably like 24 by 30.
uh-huh. So what do you normally work? Do you work larger?
I've done some pretty big ones over the years, yeah. And
Mhm.
lately I've calmed down, try to do, apartment size at least.
Yeah. The uh so this next one.
So this is from a series. My wife's from Turkey, and we would visit Turkey in the summer, and I would do some sketches of the bathers out there. And after a few years, I looked and I had like, several sketchbooks of materials. So I started doing the paintings based on that. So I did several of these bathers and on the beach. And for me, again, it's like an interest in, brushwork and color, and say that figure on the bottom right is overlapping with the other figures. So I try to think of, the abstract concerns, even though it is a figure. I guess I'm always have a struggle of like I'm depicting a figure, but I'm not interested, obviously, in depicting it in the photographic sense.
Mhm.
I like
The
to have like little bits of realism, like that middle figure, and then dissolve more into say like the abstraction, like the figure more in the bottom right front.
Yeah, those bathers, we go back to, I guess the one that I can think of is Manet, and of course that, Luncheon on the Grass, but then you have, Cezanne, who follows that with his bather series.
Oh, well, and
And,
then
and
Renoir. I mean, you could go on forever.
yeah, and it's interesting as a subject. It's a very popular subject that appears particularly in a lot of modern painting. I think the references, uh, when you get this inspiration, do you do sketches ahead of time, or is this just
Yeah.
right off?
So, I wish I had some more examples of this, but you could probably find them on the web of this series. But in this instance, I took little ink washes and a bamboo brush, and by this beach, I would just sketch the different bathers and things, and that seemed a good way to like quickly sketch out the figures.
And where you mentioned the website, your website, do you have?
My website's gregkesslerstudio.com, and or if you, I'm definitely all over the web if you want to search for this particular series. It's called the Marmara series.
Mhm.
That's the city where in Turkey where we were staying.
Okay. Gavin Glakis, who's one of our instructors, his wife's from Turkey too, and
Oh,
he goes back to paint there as well. I think the interesting thing about this one, and again, has that kind of a movement in that's similar to Guston, and I think the monumentality as well. Is this a large painting?
yeah, that's a little large. I probably like 50 by 60, something like that. Yeah.
Uh, so that
But yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I just wondered. I mean, your studio, I guess, can handle the big paintings.
Yeah, yeah, I've had some different studios over the years. Like, if it's a big old loft, I'll definitely try to paint big.
Hmm. Yeah, and okay, so then we're going to go on to the next one here. You want to tell us a little bit about this one?
So that is a big one. That's 60 by 72. And I did a lot of series of sort of mythological figures. So the figure on the left would be a centaur. And then I did a lot of series of bikers. So that this is putting the two together. I thought there was kind of epic subject matter. And there's little parachutes in the background you could see, and that little, cars, thinking sort of like a post-apocalyptic type of landscape there. But that was a lot of fun to do.
The it's an interesting idea. I mean, this exploring these kinds of connections. Um, do you do that often?
I'm sorry, you mean as far as this subject or?
Or obviously the mythological to the contemporary, in other words, the ancient mythological centaur to the
Oh
biker.
yeah, well, again, we mentioned Beckman earlier. I mean, that's totally something he would do, is just take from old mythology, but then put it in a German cafe or make it modern, and
Mhm.
so that's definitely a big clue from him. And then it's funny you mentioned Guston. Guston looked at Beckman, so there's all this overlap of there's narrative and kind of cartoony, and there's, and then of course Guston's brushwork. It's there's no way I could get around his influence there.
Yeah, yeah. The monumentality, I think, is in every one of your works, whether they feel small or large. It has that kind of quality about it. They do feel big, and I think, and they're powerful images. And I think that this is one of the things. When you look at your work, I think that there's a solidity to it, and I think you really communicate that well. The color combinations, do you want to talk a little bit about your color? Do you have a specific palette or anything like that you work with?
Um, a lot of say like the Naples and the flesh, and obviously a big into color contrast. So, but yeah, Naples and a lot of grays, and some violets and blues, but nothing a lot of cadmiums, but I think more in the somewhat in the traditional palette, nothing like too wild with the colors, like if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
No, I think that there's a lot of purity of color. What I see, I mean, I see you mixing white with your colors as well, but there's that strength of the red and that I think is really, really powerful. The, when I look at your paintings, I'm enthralled in them. I really get caught up in really feeling the imagery and the emotion in your work, and I think that that's one of the strengths that I think you really bring to the work that you're doing. Uh, how does
Yeah,
this?
I try to fill the page basically with the image, and then it always looks monumental.
Yeah, and you fit into that realm of contemporary work. I think this is one of the things that we as artists, we have to kind of find our place. But this is speaks very in a very contemporary way. And how's that has gone over for you as far as the success of your work? You find that people like your images? How do you?
I find it's like, as an artist, you have to just sort of follow whatever your path is and be, honest with that. But then, as far as people exhibiting my work or enjoying my work, I obviously have a certain niche of collectors that like my kind of style and imagery. So you have to find the right audience for your work is what I found over the years. And, you know, um, New York can be like very cool, like a lot of gray paintings or whatever. So you have to, go where your audience is and vice versa.
Mhm. And are there particular areas? I mean, obviously, you've shown in different parts of New York. Um, is there a specific area that really responds to your work? Is it?
Oh, I find Florida, like I exhibit in Palm Beach, and I think the colors and everything it go well there is what I found.
Mhm. So you're showing outside of New York, then you get around then, huh?
Yeah, I do. I'm represented by a gallery called Row Gallery in Long Island City, New York here. But other than that, the most recent exhibit was in New Jersey, and before that, Connecticut.
So yeah, so this is it. I mean, your work. You could see how you could really build new audiences. That's for sure. So how about this particular piece?
So that's a small little painting I did pretty recently, past few years, and um, again, growing up in Maryland, I always was into comic books, and so this is kind of like that idea of sort of a cartoony character and this urban setting, and I just love to sometimes get into little details. I don't know if you can see his little guitar there and a cat, and just it was just fun to do that.
Mhm.
Get lost in this kind of specific narrative. So sometimes I'll just see what I think is an interesting idea, a slice of life, like people in a diner, or I'm just looking at my own paintings here, or whatever the situation is, and I just try the idea, and sometimes it succeeds, sometimes it doesn't, but it's fun to do these type of narratives.
And how long does it take you to make a painting?
I'd say generally about a month. Like this would probably take about a month or more,
Mhm.
1 to 2 months. Though I usually try to paint every 5 days a week in the morning. So it always like you start, and it seems like I don't know. I don't have to tell you about this.
Well, the reason I asked that is because I think that the process, you working as an artist, some people might think that this work is very immediate, but like you said, I would imagine you have paintings all around the studio, so you're working on a number of them at once. But at the same time, having to put that kind of time in to get the idea the way you want it to be. So when you're making your ideas, um, how do you know when you're satisfied?
That's an interesting question. I think mostly, especially, I would say if I kept on working on it, it'd be a totally new painting. Like, I do make a lot of changes and things like that. But if, once it's settled in, then you know, it, I kind of like almost the open, sketchy quality of some of the paintings. So sometimes I might leave some canvas showing. Like in other words, kind of like to show, have a little bit of openness too,
Mhm.
you know.
And as far as editing is concerned, would you have multiple figures and then reduce it to one figure, or how do you have any kind of plan that way, or it just happens intuitively?
Oh, you mean as far as this particular painting?
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, well, I knew I wanted to do this watch salesman, and then I knew I wanted to do it, sort of like in a back alley. And then I have this thing where you can see the little white dots on the sky in
Hmm.
the background there. So I like the Japanese prints. They do that a lot. So you'll see that in a lot of my works, a lot of little white dots,
Okay, so
sort
you
of bringing the surface of the painting, alive a bit.
yeah, this touching on the Japanese, I do now in my teaching. All right, I really focus a lot on the Japanese of the 1850s. I mean, it's like they're the big influence on a lot of modern painting, and
Definitely, totally, yeah.
yeah,
And like
and
the color contrast and everything.
yeah, it's really interesting that that influence and how it's still carrying through in a lot of contemporary work. The This particular piece.
So that's pretty recent, probably 2017 or so. But I did a lot of paintings like this. Again, you could probably see on my website, in this format of almost like comic book panels. And so this character on the left, this clown slash bum, that's like a character I would use again and again. And then I was also interested in, if you see in comic books, they would have like novelty magic trick, you send away for these ads. And the ads are really cool. So I did this like a smoking dog on the upper right, but I would do some of these paintings would be reference to these gags and tricks, novelty things. And then as well as you could see, I sort of did put in these sort of modernist abstract faces, cartoony faces in there as well. And again, it was a lot about playing with the color and the paint, these sort of abstract shapes, but then pulling it together, a bit with these cartoony type faces and things.
You're is there, in other words, when you come up with an idea, do you ever try to analyze why you might have chosen that idea?
That's a good question. I can honestly know. I mean, my my best advice one of my teachers told me was think with the brush. So in other words, I more in the, I do work from sketches, and I'll put the sketch by the painting, and I'll work from that.
Mhm.
And that's how I usually do it, sort of a combination of drawing from the sketch and then putting more larger areas of paint in. So it's drawing and painting, drawing and painting. Yeah.
The color combinations are interesting in this particular piece. Just the balance of color. Do you consider that when you're making your paintings? Do you?
Oh, that totally. Like, as I said, I studied under Sam Gilliam, and even though he was an abstract painter, he was a huge colorist, and I love playing with color contrast. And some days I'll just spend thinking about which color will make the painting pop and become alive. I kind of like to think of the paintings almost like a cup of espresso, like you kind of hopefully will wake up your senses with the colors.
Mhm.
But yeah, certainly Matisse and different ways to make the color vibrate.
Yeah, this is a good. I like really. I'm impressed with this one. That really, as you said, it's one of your more recent ones, but it really has something that underlying it. There's a psychological feeling to your work. All right. One is essentially, I would call your paintings, and it's not a negative term, but it has a certain kind of raw quality about it. And I guess you're really expressing that raw quality of life as well in the way you handle the paint. I mean, it goes together, and your colors really go together quite well too. Do you want to speak about that at all?
I mean, I guess when you asked earlier about do I analyze the subjects, I like to sort of keep a loose narrative so that the viewer kind of fills in the story a bit. But I'm sorry, what was the second part? Just
Well, the thing that I see, like for instance, there's a certain automatistic quality to this too. When you talk in terms of the realist or surrealist kind of attitude, where you're really having imagery that we, we obviously are attracted to, and we want to, I guess underlying everything is we feel that there's another message.
Mhm.
So, that's what I see with like you said, the dog smoking,
Right.
how did you come up with that idea?
Well, yeah, again, there's these comic book ads, and they would have these, and this goes back actually, I think, like for American art, I think a lot of, besides abstract expressionists, I think a lot of the greatest American artists like Mad Magazine and comic books, a lot of those artists were incredibly talented. And but long story short, they would have these novelty, you sent away for a, well, in this case, a smoking dog trick, or, and then all these ads were actually, the drawings were really great too. So a lot of, I did this whole series was a lot of these references to, trick gum and the different ads they would have. But the I did a lot of the paintings of that clown figure on the upper left, and it was, to me, it was sort of like a Beckett kind of thing, like just sort of the lonely everyman, and things like that. So just, again, there's not, I don't think there's like, I think the meaning might come up from the viewer, but I don't know if there's, but I will tell you that with, when you said about analyze, like the greatest thing for painting for me is, say I'm just starting a painting, I might just put down that yellow tie, right? And then I'll go home and I'll be like, maybe it should be red, maybe it should be green. And then I'll be up all night thinking about that, and that will fuel me. So it's just, color is just so emotive, and you could just think about, just spend a few days just laying on a yellow or something like that.
That's a good comment, because I think that, when I look at your work, there's a lot of depth to your work. All right. And it's sometimes hard to get the artist to kind of express that. I mean, because art, you don't necessarily put into words. All right. You tend to, I mean, we tend to go with feeling, as Cezanne said, go with feeling, and
Mm.
I feel the strength of your work is that. I think that we get a real dynamic feeling from your work, and it's impressive. So I think anybody watching this video, you're getting to know Greg, and see where he's coming from. And I think studying with him is going to be a valuable experience. So let's go on to the next one, and perhaps you can talk about that, and you know. And how something like this might influence your students. Do you bring uh, this kind of when you're teaching? Do you bring a lot of your own experiences to your teaching? How's that go?
Oh yeah, well, I think an artist can definitely be a presence, to a student, and that hopefully can inspire them. And I try to mainly focus on formal and technique oriented in my teaching, and um, of course art history as well. But even though I think whether you're painting abstractly or figures, that there's concerns the same as far as the limitations of painting and the formal concerns. So I think that you can bring it out in whatever the student, so they can, just experience the joy of painting.
Mhm. And there's originality in all your work. So maybe speak to this piece.
So I did, again, a series of people at parties and catered parties, and this is one of them, was little bits of still life in the foreground, and on the lower left, many of my paintings, if you look over my body of work, there was a Manet at the end of his life. I don't know if you're familiar with the story. He did these small still lifes of flowers when he was in the hospital. The artist friends would bring him flowers, and he'd do these little small still lifes of flowers. So that's a little quote of one of them on the lower left. And if you look at, I have several paintings where there's this one particular Manet painting, and I've done it dozens of times, quoted that. But again, here it's like I like to have the overlapping figures, and some of the figures might be a little more naturalistic and some not. I mean, certainly that lady on the left is a little Picasso-esque. but it's just kind of unusual painting for me because of the large use of white. For me, it's, for example, Manet, when he would paint a dress, he wouldn't be filling it in, like he's painting a house. He sort of showed you the tactility of the paint. And that's always what's excited me about painting, is showing sort of what it can do, and not so much descriptive, but also the possibilities, the juiciness of it, etc., the sensual aspect of it.
Yeah. And that's when people ask me about painting, I always say the knowledge is in the paint. And you can tell by looking at your work, okay? You can tell that that's one of the characteristics that you want to express. I mean, it's obvious that the paint quality, the drawing style, they all go together. They complement each other. And I think that's one of the I think the gifts that you bring to the work. Okay. Any other question or anything you want to say about this one? As far as obviously it's a party, was that theme was important to you?
Yeah, I did several paintings. I think actually there's another one coming up in the same vein, but I thought, people at cocktail parties, just great subject matter, and like the Park Avenue crowd.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then this one.
So that is going back a little bit farther. Again, when we're talking about mythology, I was this period of work. Had these characters, and I was thinking in the mythological vein, like animal hybrids, and this particular one, she has a mask and some flowers in her hair. So there's several series where it was this sort of loose mythology again, like there's a narrative, but maybe the viewer would fill it in. And also about the figures, I did several figures where they're losing their gravity. So in other words, the figures aren't so much stationary, they're kind of floating. So that was what interested me a lot at that time as well.
Yeah, this is a very interesting one. A little different than the other paintings. The other paintings have a strong kind of classical feel, vertical or horizontal relationship in the work. Okay, this one is much more active from the standpoint of movement, and almost feels like even though you can't feel a circle in it, you can feel kind of a kind of revolving kind of motion. Where it is working in a kind of cyclical way. Your eye just moves from the right to the left and then back to the right again, and you continue to do that. For me, there's a lot of movement in this one. And can you speak to the difference between the two styles that you have?
I mean, it is weird. I'll just start a body of work, and then whatever the subject matter kind of somewhat dictates how it's going to go. In this case, it's a little more specific than some of the paintings. I was always interested in hand gestures in art, so you can see all these hands have like very specific gestures. And the main thing for me was my figures before they're more like stationary, and I like this idea of almost like the figures are floating and they're overlapping and tumbling, and then there's parts of figures like that arm on the bottom. So, and then so I had several paintings in the series of this kind of idea of filling up the page with this kind of narrative.
Mm-hmm. Egon Schiele and his hand gestures. Is that did that have any influence on you, or do you know much about him?
Of course, I'm familiar with him, but to be honest, I'm more like the weird, like Flemish painters, and
Okay.
there's always Rubens. There's always a lot of the Mannerists. They always sometimes I would just search for unusual hand gestures, and
Mm-hmm.
Aang, of course, like he always seemed to make the hands look relaxed, which is really hard to do. But I always say I'll never draw as good as Aang, but at least I try.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and is there any mythological story to this one, or did you have a narrative at all, or did you just start uh, relating these images to one another just intuitively?
Yeah, it's more about I have some that are more centaurs, but more you put a horse in there and just she has this mask and they both have masks. Maybe but I didn't have really a specific story in mind. It's more of just using these kind of elements and creating the viewer create a story for themselves.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, I mean, you can feel a connection to the past, and just the stories of mythology. They're strong in your work. This particular piece, this is a little bit more non-objective.
Yeah, so that's relatively new too. Sometimes I actually work on a painting like this next to figurative painting. But I did a lot of these paintings where you could sort of see back these kind of faces and shapes back with the painting of the clown that we showed earlier. But this I would have a lot of start with sort of a half cartoony, half Picasso-esque face, and then I'm interested a lot in early Jackson Pollock. He would have not a figure in a literal sense like heads, feet, and toe, but he would have little bits of a chopped up figure where he's influenced by Native American art, and so that kind of like sort of bits of figuration, loose figuration, always interests me as the idea here, and of course, color as usual. You're familiar with that contemporary artist George Condo, but he had exhibit once, and it almost looked like he took a Picasso head and a cartoony face and collaged them together, and that was to me like genius. So I did definitely inspired a lot this series.
Mm-hmm. Well, being in New York, you get to see a lot of other artists' work, I would imagine, and it's interesting to see the trends as well. When I look at what you're doing here, it really speaks about color. All right. I mean, this particular piece, whereas the one prior is more about line and I think drawing the figure
That's true.
and the movement, but this one is all about color. Do you find yourself heading in that direction more, or how do you feel about your work that way?
No, in general, like I love just pure color and the possibilities. Matisse comes to mind, just the experimenting with color, and certainly these bright primary cadmium type colors is I'm always excited to use. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then the next one.
So this again is very recent, and that is back to the series of cocktails and cocktail parties in Park Avenue, etc. And so again, this is good because on the lower right you can see that little still life flower in the vase. And again, that goes back to what I was saying earlier, that particular Manet still life I quoted so many times. It's just always exciting for me. So we have certainly, again, interested in color contrast. I loved painting that fur coat and these little vignettes of these little figures in the background sort of cut off and overlapped and little slices of, a Degas type thing. And it's probably hard to see, but again, like I love with the white tablecloth, just showing the tactile aspect of that and experimenting with that. And, with my figures, they're certainly, I guess, expressionists, but I try to bring out, it's more about bringing out light and depicting them in that manner with color, as opposed to more maybe naturalistic figuration. But I like to kind of go in and out. So in other words, that central figure, the face is perhaps more naturalistic, but then the figure behind her is more, just the cartoon shape. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And what I find interesting is the blue eyes in this particular piece. I don't know if that's something that you keyed on, but honestly, that's exactly where I go. I go to those eyes that are sort of like a Roman sculpture, where where they might have been, or not Roman sculpture, but Greek sculpture, where they might have been painted on the pupils might have been painted on that blank surface. There's a blankness to those two eyes and turquoise like you have there. And I find that incredibly fascinating to me. Do you want
That's
to?
that's interesting. Yeah, it's a good point that you brought that up because a lot of people ask me, and a lot of my paintings I don't paint in the eyes, and sometimes I do, but for me, it's I find the viewer just ends up just staring at the particular eye. So I liked, of course, Picasso and looking at Roman art. So what you're talking about, Greek sculpture, how the eyes were, and Modigliani, how the eyes were not painted in. And so I usually use like a light gray, and I like to experiment with that. Going in and out. Sometimes maybe more filling the eyes more naturalistic, but then going more to because to me then the face becomes more abstract, and I just like that quality to it.
Yeah, and it's penetrating. I mean, it's really you really
Thanks.
make a connection to it. All right, and then this particular one.
So again, that's in the recent series of say like a Park Avenue lady with her little dog, and um, again, even though I'm dealing with this figuration, as you can see, with the color to me is of central importance. A lot of the modernists, Matisse, Picasso, and how they use pure color to make an expressive figures. That's a lot of, and then we have the hand gestures. A lot of it is, what's interests me and excites me. This one's called Fur in Pink.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting that some of the names for your paintings, because I think we haven't really talked about that. But do you wind up titling your paintings based
Yeah,
on?
to be honest, again, I don't have any deep meanings. It's usually a lot of times like what music I'm listening to at the time. So they're titles of songs and things like that. But sometimes things will just really click and go together, like the watch salesman earlier or something like that. Then, it really clicks.
Mhm. Okay, and then that's it. Let's get back now to just talking to you. All right.
Sure.
This was really great and really informative, and it's really, we get to know who our instructors are by looking at their work and their personalities and what they bring and the uniqueness of their ideas. And I feel you really add a lot to our program in at the Yellow Barn. Particularly, we really want a diverse kind of faculty where we have a lot of different ideas instead of
Yeah, I've seen. Yeah.
basing it on one aspect of things. I think that I feel our students grow much better by having those experiences. And you, like I said, having you join us is going to be it's going to be a great opportunity for students to take your class. I want to ask you a little question about that. What do you feel is important in the work of your students?
Um, well, mainly that they're willing to experiment and not to be timid with the paint. Try to, and just enjoy the aspect of painting. And then I just like to guide them a bit, like with the formal aspects and different techniques that could help expand their vision.
Mhm. The so the if
Like,
they
in,
do
sorry,
take
go ahead.
if they take your class, what is going to be important for them to achieve?
So the idea of the class is this is something that I have taught before in private students. Um, is say a novice painter is just starting to paint and they're feeling uncomfortable and how to get them started in a few simple ways. And so there's three steps to this where they start with drawing on a colored ground. So for example, early Picasso, he did a lot of paintings on a rose ground and he would just draw on the figures very simply and then maybe paint the ground back. So the starting point would be that just to get you sort of warmed up and started. And then I the second part of the class deals with Spanish palette, which is yellow, ochre, red, black, and white. So with this simple palette, Manet, Velasquez, Goya, they created these masterworks with just a few simple colors. So we're gonna experiment with that color palette and just see how we can make paintings very simply out of that palette. And then
Mhm.
the final part of the class is color contrast, and then going back to my work and showing how to help make colors vibrate and black and white Japanese prints and just that's going to be like the third layer of making you more comfortable with the complexity of painting. And the idea is just more of a hands-on approach and hopefully you know, for me, when students, I get just equally as excited as they do when they're creating, and it gives me a lot of energy to see them, you know, achieve and grow a bit there.
Yeah, that's one of the great things about being a teacher. I think you're sharing something that, we as not only as artists, but the fact that we can share our knowledge and we can inspire people. And I think that there's no doubt. I know you, all these years, and you're an incredibly inspiring person. I mean, you really have a courage and a authenticity that I think is unique. And if anything, you have that drive, that passion. I mean, you've been working at it now. This is, it's quite interesting. When I knew you, you were young, and of course, now you're into your career, and I'm seeing how successful you are. And just having you back with us, I think is going to be great. So this is going to be a workshop, right? It's a
Let's see. The Jace is pretty positive. It's January 21st, 22nd in the morning. But it's on the website.
Yeah. So, and in the future, hopefully we'll continue to have Greg teach with us. I mean, he's coming from Brooklyn to come down to the Yellow Barn, and I think if anything, he's going to bring that kind of connection to New York City and the artists of New York City. And for anybody who's going to be taking your class, God, they can pick your brain for sure. I think
that's funny. Appreciate it.
Lot,
Oh, sorry.
No, I think you bring a lot. So do you want to speak about anything else here before we end?
Well, just touching on that, I feel I was talking to a much older artist, say like this is in the late 60s, and he before art became much more like professional, like trying to get the students out on galleries early and things like that. The teachers didn't have any expectations, so they just freely gave to the students and vice versa. There was no thinking so much about money and things. So in other words, I just love the idea of giving back and sharing information and sharing whatever knowledge I can give, either formally or any other ways. It's exciting for me as well. It'd be a little homecoming here.
Yeah, it is, and I think that we're looking forward to it. With that, folks, I think you can, after this interview, you can see what to expect from Greg. I think he's got a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge, a lot of enthusiasm and passion. And I think that when you do take his course, I believe that you're going to be able to absorb a lot of that and really grow as artists. So I highly recommend that you take his class. I really appreciate you, Greg, for being here today and sharing your knowledge. And just want to say to everyone, thank you for watching, and we'll hopefully see you at in one of Greg's workshops. All right. With that, remember, it's you can go to the Yellow Barn website, yellowbarnstudio.com, to see the classes and to find the instructors. All right. Thank you, Greg.
Yep, it's all there. Great. Thank you.
All right. Bye.